We're starting.
We have started.
Yay. Hi, everybody.
Hi, everybody.
Welcome to Writing the Novel.
Yes, Structure and Outline.
Structure and Outline. I'm Annabelle. This is not Nancy.
I am Andrew. You will have seen me online along with Anna. Hi, Anna, if you're there.
Yes, big shout out to Anna, who is our assistant for this run of the course, has been collating your questions for us for this Hangout, and you'll see her popping up in the discussions. So make sure you give her a big virtual wave and a shout out when you see her. Thank you, Anna, for being part of the team. So here we are. Welcome to the course. I feel like there's such a journey that we're embarking on right now, and there's so much information to get across to you. But I think the very first thing that I want to say is we will be archiving these Hangouts, and if any questions occur to you as you're watching this, you can always put them to us next time. And Andrew's also going to be monitoring the feed live. So if questions come up as we're talking, he will be able to monitor and we'll be able to throw them into the mix.
Yeah, and if you ask a question on here, you may not get an answer right away, depending on where we're at in here, but I will keep an eye on them all, and then I will be bringing them up.
Andrew's multitasking.
I am, so that's why I have the headphones. I'm not DJing or anything at the moment. I am keeping an eye on the picture and the sound quality, and also the chat.
He'll DJ next time. So we've got some quick stats to get us started. We have a lot of learners here in Canada and in the US, but we're also really delighted to welcome writers.
Anna's here.
Oh,
hi,
sorry.
Anna.
Hi, Anna. And we're delighted to welcome writers from around the world, including the UK, Australia, Brazil, Spain, Ireland, Italy, Switzerland, Turkey, Japan, New Zealand, Colombia, Singapore, and South Korea. I think South Korea is a new one for us.
Maybe.
I think it might be. I know a word in Korean. Sabunim. It means teacher. My kids are big into the taekwondo. So hello, South Korea. We also have a few from all over / location unknown. I'm hoping that means Mars. So we're going to assume that you have achieved singularity and are joining the course from within the internet. Who wrote this?
That was Anna.
Was that Anna?
Yes. My traditional
Sounds like you.
My traditional response to that was the International Space Station. So I would just wave.
But from within, that you've manifested as a consciousness within the internet. And you just want to write a novel. I mean, that's
better than taking over the world.
Yes.
Maybe there's a novel in that.
If you haven't introduced yourself to us yet, please do. We're always curious to hear where everybody comes from, what you're interested in, what kind of novel you're aiming to write, all of that good stuff.
Yeah, and there's been lots of chatter on the discussion forums already, so it's great to see people talking and answering each other's questions and generally having a good time.
So this first week, as well as introductions, getting a feel for how the course is going to run, we jumped right into the outlining process. You all explored what an outline actually is, and you got started thinking about world building for your novel and also antagonism, a hugely important piece. And then most importantly of all, perhaps, who your protagonist is. So the first thing that we asked you to do was look at some favorite works, either novels or movies, and see if you could easily identify the protagonist for each one, as well as their primary yearning and the forces of antagonism that they face.
Do you want me to go through some of these?
We've got a whole range.
Yeah, we do. I have it printed out. Okay, so there's a wide range of stories here, running the gamut from classics to thrillers to contemporary fiction. You wrote about books, including 1984, Gone Girl, Flowers for Algernon, Pride and Prejudice. I know a favorite of yours.
No.
No? Wait, not Pride and Prejudice. Sorry. The other one.
Yeah, the other one.
The other one.
Carry on, Andrew.
Sorry. The Kite Runner, The Hunger Games, Room, The Museum of Innocence, Les Miserables, Ender's Game, The Brothers Karamazov, My Brilliant Friend, Ghosted, That Hideous Strength, Killing Commendatore, Still Mine, the Harry Potter books, and many more. So lots of favorites in there.
Lots of great books in there, and such a great variety as well.
Yeah, it's always interesting to see the variety. Also, there were movies. People included Green Book, which was the one that just won the Oscar.
Yes, Best Picture.
My parents are big fans of that. I have not seen it. Forrest Gump, Lion, Crazy Rich Asians, and romantic comedies in all as a general category.
I know Crazy Rich Asians is a favorite of Nancy's as well. She really loved the construction of that movie. So it was really great, to see you guys pick out your protagonists, their desires, their struggles. And of course, as you probably could have anticipated, in some cases, it's going to be really, really clear who your protagonist and antagonist are. And in other cases, it's going to be a little bit more of a struggle to kind of figure that out. So for example, both Rachel Dale 17 and Nivea Froze. Let's go with that.
Sure.
I'm probably mispronouncing that. Used Harry Potter to illustrate a protagonist with strong desires and clear antagonisms. But there was still a lot of talk about what those desires, what that true yearning of Harry's is. Is it to overcome meekness and grow to become the strong hero of a magical world, as Claire O'D suggests? Is it a strong yearning to belong, to have a family or a community, as Julia M. Witta offers? These two yearnings potentially are at odds with each other even. Can a protagonist have more than one yearning?
Yes.
What do you think, Andrew?
I think they can. Of course. I mean, and they can often be more complicatedly intertwined.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, in any particular book, you do want the protagonist to have a fairly clear desire in that book itself. Would you not say?
Yes, I would say that. I think we're going to talk about it more as we get along further, because there were questions around a protagonist's desires or yearnings changing or evolving through the course of a novel. And so we're definitely going to come back around, put a pin in that, and we're going to come back around to that.
For Harry Potter, I would say, I mean, the family thing is really strong throughout that. You know, as
Absolutely.
an orphan, right? He's searching with a horrible guardians. He's searching for a family, and he finds it in a community.
Yeah.
Which is a theme that happens in a lot of books, I think. People building a community, maybe if they have a missing family or family issues, in young adult fiction.
But it's interesting how you can have that search for family and search for community at the same time as you're having that search for your own independent identity, which is something that's going on as well. And I think that, you know, human beings embody this sort of push-pull. I was sitting in a meeting yesterday where people were talking about the conflicting desires in the typical creative writing workshop, which is on the one hand to be told you're perfect just as you are, and on the other hand to be told, or to go into it feeling that you want to be told that you're perfect just as you are, and on the other hand going into it wanting to learn and improve at what you do. And we can go sit in a creative writing workshop and feel both of those things simultaneously, and there's a complete cognitive dissonance there, and yet that's who we are as human beings, right? So yes, it's complicated. These questions are complicated. And then we move on to the type of story, just to complicate things even further, revolving around two or more strong characters where there could be some ambiguity about who the protagonist is.
That's true.
Rosanna VEP names the film Amadeus. Love that film. As one of their favorites, even though they're not sure if Salieri, the narrator, should be considered a protagonist or antagonist. That is a really interesting one.
That's an interesting
Great
question.
Gatsby is another example of this, where you have the Nick Carraway character who's the I, who's the guy saying, I did this, I did that, who's narrating what happens. But then Gatsby is the person whose story is being told. And so often when we have that addition of a character as a narrator or as a framing device, it becomes a very live question. Who's the protagonist? Do I have two protagonists? And that is quite possible.
It is possible.
And I would say to Roseanne VEP, the way that I would resolve that with Amadeus, and I'm going to send you a way to think about this and come back and let us know. But, you know, can you identify the various decisions and steps that we would expect to see a protagonist go through with Mozart on the one hand and with Salieri on the other? Does he have conflicts? Does he undergo change? Is he having to make decisions that commit him to action? If you can't find those, probably not your protagonist. If you can find those, he probably either is or he's one of two. So I'm going to leave you to go figure that one out.
It's an interesting question. You have to think about the choices that you see in the movie itself.
That's right. And then M. Grobler also made reference to Game of Thrones, where of course we have many protagoni. I wonder if that's the plural.
Sure. Protagonesses, like hippopotamuses.
Do you want to read Night Owl? Oh, hello, Night Owl. You're a returner.
Yes, we have a few returners. Night Owl. I also see. I saw a couple of familiar names in there. So welcome back, everyone who's taken one of our other courses. Also going to prove that you do not have to take the structure and outlining course first, though it is helpful if you're just getting started writing a novel for sure. But it can be learning structure. You can take these in any order you want. Learning structure is useful at any time. So Night Owl finds Gone Girl to have two protagonists who are in turn each other's antagonists. While the characters switch up their roles, their desires are clear, as are the roadblocks to these desires. By comparison, Robertson Davies' The Manticore was found to be lacking in clear character motivation. There was a protagonist, but he seemed to be in conflict with his dead father, his own psychology, and possibly more. But it wasn't enough to make the story cohesive, compelling, unified, or to support a plot.
Yeah, if I remember my Robertson Davies properly, that's the one where he takes a deep dive into Jungian psychoanalysis, I think. So that's not necessarily a super conventionally structured novel, if it's the one I'm thinking of. But the Gone Girl example is an interesting one because you absolutely can have two characters whose desires are in opposition to each other, where we have a sense of protagonism with both of them. Remember that an antagonist is not an enemy. They're not an evil person. They're simply a character whose desires and yearnings bring them into conflict with someone else. So you can have a mother and daughter be protagonist and antagonist, where they both want the best thing for the daughter. It's a matter of interpretation what that best thing is. Maybe the daughter really wants to get married and have kids, and the mom is saying, no, 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 it's the 21st century. You need to be fulfilled by going and having a career. So they both want the daughter to be happy. It just looks different the way that they think that should go. And so that brings them into that antagonist-protagonist situation. There's a lot of subtlety there with what an antagonist is.
Yeah, and that's a natural conflict.
Absolutely.
But everyone can feel the family conflict, right? Almost everyone should be able to see something of themselves in a story like that.
That's right.
Greek chorus, great username.
Yes, I like that one.
We could talk about the plural narrator there.
That's right.
Brings up the example of Zora Neale Hurston's Janie Crawford, the protagonist of Their Eyes Were Watching God. They point out that although Janie faces societal antagonism, her own worst antagonist is herself. She wants to be married to someone she loves, but she has no idea what that means. Initially naive and ignorant, she defers to a world that oppresses her individual thoughts and ideas. In this way, she becomes her own most powerful antagonist. But as the novel progresses, she evolves and begins to discover her own identity and voice. This raises the question of whether societal antagonism and internal antagonism can be more or less the same thing, when an individual has internalized limiting or hurtful messages from outside. I think that's a great point.
Yeah, and this is a good moment for us to revisit, I think, those three levels of antagonism that we talked about this week. Andrew, can you name one?
Personal,
so that would be like between me and my mom, or me and Andrew, whoever my antagonist is in a given situation.
Interpersonal.
Oh, that's interpersonal. No.
It's personal, interpersonal, and societal.
Oh, I use internal.
Internal. I'm using Nancy's words.
You're using Nancy's words. Okay, sorry. Teacher fails the course. Internal is when you're your own worst enemy, as sorry, who was that?
Maybe I'm getting it wrong.
Well, it doesn't matter. We'll go through all three anyway. As Greek chorus very fairly pointed out, there's that internal one where you are potentially taking on societal expectations and you become your own worst enemy in that sense. So this you against yourself. There's then interpersonal, which was the one that I just talked through, where you're coming into conflict with another individual. And then there's societal, where perhaps you're coming into conflict with unjust laws, or you're bumping into societal expectations from whatever country or culture that you're from, where you feel that you're pushing against those. And very often we see those three working together. It's not that my internal and sense of antagonism is I hate my own body image, and then my interpersonal is I don't know, what's something that's completely unrelated to that.
Someone's trying to take over the world.
I have a super ambitious child who really wants to go out and make a success of themselves, and I just want to, take it easy and be a hippie. And then my societal one is
religious, perhaps.
Some kind of often they don't go off in a well-structured narrative. They're not going to go shooting off in all these different directions. They're going to be related to each other. And again, this is coming back to the point that Greek chorus was making, that we might have a general societal antagonism. And let's say that could be, I think a good example is racism, where you have a character who's living in a racist society. And then if they are a character of color and they sort of begin to experience, to take that on and begin to experience some self-loathing, or to feel that they're less worthy than other people in society because they've taken on the baggage of the societal injustice. And then that becomes an internal one. And of course, you can imagine very easily, I think, how racism could play out in an interpersonal sense too. So yeah, very often that societal to internal, it's like going from a general to a specific. It's a sort of law and then manifestation of, or how is that embodied in your character? That was a very long-winded.
It was well put.
Re-encapsulation,
You're
but I think
also
it's
correct
really
that
important.
that in the course we say internal, interpersonal, and societal. I personally say personal sometimes.
You personally confused me, Andrew.
I personally confused you.
Should we go on to D. Daniels?
D. Daniels.
We're going on with this idea.
Yes, elaborated on this idea, considering the three sources of antagonism, and wondered how they might overlap, which I think we just discussed.
Yeah.
They say, I had never considered how they may be present in one character throughout a story. I find myself chewing on the potential gray space where internal antagonism and societal antagonism could end up being one and the same.
Yeah.
Perhaps that's only likely in a more self-focused character or an excessive part of grandstanding, but I want to be aware that I layer these three specifically and distinctly.
Yeah, and I don't think it is a question of the character just being really, narcissistic or grandstanding, as you put it. I mean, I think that that's a very natural thing, that the sort of the water that you swim in, the world that you are shaped by, is going to affect your view of yourself, and so that outside becomes the inside very quickly.
And sometimes that's the sort of thing that you have to do some reflection on to see that. I mean, we all live in a society and we take certain things for granted without really thinking about them. Mm-hmm. And so books are a great way to sort of start pushing back on some of that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And then Lachine mentions the concept of the anti-hero protagonist as seen in China Miéville's Perdido Street Station. Oh, I'm going to butcher this name. Isaac, I'm guessing that's Vander Grimnebulin.
Sounds good.
Is a brilliant but somewhat unscrupulous human scientist who left a lucrative position at the university due to his inability to teach. Isaac encounters all three levels of antagonism, interpersonal, personal, and societal, in a complex narrative web. Although not a classic hero, Isaac's desires and yearnings drive the narrative forward and have far-ranging results.
And China Miéville is an interesting writer because he, early on in his writing career, made it clear that he wanted to write in every genre he could think of. He could write a book, and they're all fantasy, science fiction. They're in that genre, but fairly literary. He's a very interesting writer.
Well, and there again, in the same sense that we say that an antagonist is not necessarily an evil character or an enemy. Mm-hmm. A protagonist doesn't have to be all sweetness and light.
No.
They can be very complex. They can be, Humbert in Lolita, if you want to go all the way down that road. But think of film noir. Think of and those great sort of Dashiell Hammett, Raymond Chandler novels where those started, where you have a character who is very cynical, very flawed, but they'll have some kind of a moral code that they live by, even if it's not entirely in sync with the world around them.
And then in TV, Breaking Bad is a famous example of
The Sopranos, and that's become a real TV trope of the film noir character, or of the flawed hero, the anti-hero, But they can absolutely still be a protagonist. Just because they're not especially likable doesn't mean they can't be a protagonist. And then we're moving on to the assignment.
So the main assignment this week was to fill out the character self-questionnaire for your protagonist. Yes. This is a biggie. It's a big questionnaire, and it's big on purpose. The goal of this exercise was to get you to put yourself in your character's shoes to answer the questions as if you were the character yourself, which is very important. And see if you learned some things you were not expecting.
A little bit of method acting going on.
Yeah. And we were delighted to hear that the exercise was useful and eye-opening. A lot of people said that they had learned things that they hadn't been expecting to. Lots of people found empathy for characters they didn't realize they had. They also found it difficult too. The long list of questions made them realize they didn't know their characters as well as they might. And most people do not do 63 questions about their characters when they're thinking of the story. Often they just have the character in their head. So being forced to go through this, it's very useful. Having to think like their character rather than just about them is a common challenge, as was making sure the character was not just a version of the author, but someone who had to live and breathe as a separate person.
Yes, absolutely. So, for example, Golifak realized that they have more in common with their antagonist than with their protagonist. And they say, and that's when it hit me. My antagonist has more similar characteristics to me than Mina, the protagonist herself. Mina is the character I would want the reader to follow. Aside from all the flaws and mistakes she has, she is human after all. She is the one that will take the reader's hand and pull them into a journey. So I have started to rethink about Mina and the person she is and will become during the story. Fantastic. So it sounds like you're invested in making your characters more complex. And I love that realization about finding stuff that's compelling in your antagonist too, because that almost guarantees that you've got a richly layered antagonist. They're not just a two-dimensional bad guy.
Yeah, very important. Ray Hart also noted this relationship between the writer and the character. They wrote, "The most stunning reflections for myself were A, there's consistently a piece of myself with any character building, and B, I can envision with practice the art of exaggeration with the answers as a means to creating extremely interesting characters and getting to the crux of their yearnings and internal antagonisms." And definitely, I think we say, okay, be careful you're not making the character yourself. At the same time, there's nothing wrong with using parts of yourself or exaggerating parts of yourself. I think that's really useful.
Absolutely.
Right?
I mean, indeed, what else are you going to draw from in some respects?
Well, other than stealing from everyone you've ever met. But yes.
Well, yeah, no.
But internally, though,
yeah,
you know what it's like to be a person.
Yes. You know what it's like to be one person.
One person. You don't know what it's like to be the people.
Well, I can't speak for anybody else. I mean, there may be other people out there who are having all their, internet manifestation.
That's true.
Selves, multiple selves. But I think this is maybe a good place to jump in and say that we really designed that character questionnaire to be a very organic and a very flexible tool for you to use. So it's not chipped in stone that you have to use those, what is it, 63
I said 63. It might be that many.
It might be that many. You should use what is useful to you. And if there are questions that were missing where you were like, I wonder what my character would say about that, you should feel free to add those on. You don't just have to do this for your protagonist. A lot of learners over the past iterations of this course have told us that they found it particularly useful to do this for your primary antagonist as well, to get to know them more and to give them all of those facets, all of that nuance. And the other thing that comes up a lot, and I think this is going to come up in the comments a little bit further down, is it can be really useful for you to do this character questionnaire for the same character at different points in their life, particularly if you're covering a span of many years. So the questionnaire that you do for someone as a child, if you're doing a Bildungsroman, may well not be the same questionnaire that you do for that same character.
It would be very unusual
on their deathbed or on their wedding day or whatever. Like, it can change, and even in over a shorter span of time. I'm thinking of something like Room now from Emma Donoghue, because that was one of the examples that you gave. And I love that book so much. I think that if you did a character questionnaire, or if Emma did a character questionnaire for Jack on page 1, and then at the end, those would look different. And it really is only a span of months that's passing.
But huge changes in someone's life.
Yeah.
Enormous change.
Yeah. And that's going to bring us back to the question of changing yearnings and changing goals and changing desires too. So we should maybe go on, because we're going to come to that.
Yes.
Ray Hart noted the relationship between.
That's the one.
Oh no, we just read that one. Sorry.
Carpenter Cynthia. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
So many discovered new facets and dimensions of your characters. Carpenter Cynthia 71 writes, "I found out that she is suffering, but also there are touches of humor to her tragic story. She's more three-dimensional and more interesting than I ever imagined."
Fantastic.
E.A. Doley, welcome back.
Hello.
Discovered she's actually more sympathetic than I thought. She has a softer side under all the sarcasm and judgment.
Nice.
For some of you, the exercise also helped raise awareness of the work that's still to be done. Our Joe, and I'm going to pronounce that poorly, realized my story is in need of a shift. So far, the protagonist is reflected on a public/private trauma from 10 years before while trying to manage her present. The question for me is, where does she go from here?
Can we stop there for a second before you read the next one? So that is a really interesting premise for a story, and it's a common trap that the writer can get themselves into, where you're beginning a story with a major life event that's still informing the present that happened in the past. So maybe you're cutting back and forth and telling past and present. Excuse me. But you have to be careful that the present tense of the novel is not overwhelmed by the emotional force of that thing that happened in the past. You have to find something in the present that can match that. Otherwise, the question becomes, why do we need this present version of the story? Why can't you just tell us about the thing that happened? If it was so important, so powerful. So if it is that a character, I don't know, let's say they witnessed a terrible crime, and it was traumatizing. And now what's happening in the present that's bringing that back, and that is as compelling, as gripping for the reader, and makes sense to bring it back logically, that the character is coming to terms with this. Okay, how are they coming to terms with it? Are they going through a similar set of events to that thing in the past. Maybe they've become a criminal themselves. Maybe they've become a perpetrator of this kind of crime. What is it? How do you balance out the emotional weight of the past and present story? So I think it's a really interesting, sorry, I can't pronounce that either, RJO. I don't know. It's a really interesting thing that you've raised. Okay, they've got their trauma. This is who they are, but then where do they go from here? And it's good that you're asking that question so early. That's gonna pay off for you, I think. And then following up from that, Francis Sprout noted, the process will require more fallow time, concerted sessions of trying to imagine her, yes, but also time for my subconscious to do some work.
And there are 59 questions. I looked it up. So 63 was not far off.
Close.
Yes,
Close.
maybe sub-questions. All right, and then we're going to get back a little bit to what we were talking about how things change over time.
Yes.
Because Christy Webster noted, for a number of the questions, I didn't know if I should answer the personal questions from a position at the start of the novel or at the end. For example, what's your biggest accomplishment would be different from the beginning to the end.
Yep.
Margaret 1205 brought this up as well. I ended up answering based on the beginning of the story, she said. She also wondered about the last question. Imagine and describe the moment of your death and what purpose it served.
Okay, so dealing with, I'll come back to that latter one, but dealing with that first one, when in a character's life should you answer those questions? I think it makes a lot of sense for people, just as they're setting out on the journey of outlining their novel, to answer it for the character in the place where they are now. Because I'm assuming that most people's conception of their character falls closer to the sort of beginning of the novel, end of the spectrum, than the end. We don't usually think, hey, I have a great idea for a conclusion to a novel. That's not usually how it comes to us, right? You
usually think of the inciting incident.
We usually think, hey, that would be the beginning of a great story. So I would say start there by all means. If you do know that you already have a bit of a fuller conception of the arc that your character is going to go through, it may well be useful for you to do this process again, looking at that later part in the character's life. But if you can't foresee that yet, don't worry. The character work that you've done here, you're going to hang on to that. And then when you've sort of worked through some of the outline and gotten a better sense of your story and your character and where it's going, you'll have that to refer back to when you want to see sort of, okay, how am I going to track these changes that the character is going through? And then the question of imagine and describe the moment of your death. I think that's a really interesting one, because what it's doing is getting the character to cast their own minds forward. What's their vision for their own future? Is this a character who, thinks that they're going to commit suicide? That tells us a whole lot about that character's personality. Is it someone who says, well, I live in a post-apocalyptic world where there's extreme environmental degradation, and I'm probably only going to live to 22 because that's typical in my world. Well, that tells us a lot about the world building, right? Or it's, I'm going to die in my sleep, happily married with 17 grandchildren. No, you're not, says the evil novelist, right? But I mean, it gives a sense of the character thinking of themselves going forward, and it's going to tie back to, if you think about it, those yearnings, that last character.
What does the character want?
Who I'm killing off young because they want to die elderly with a big family. And you can see very clearly what their desires are there. So I think that that's what we're getting at with this question. And if you find it's disturbing to think about, you can tweak it a little bit and say, imagine and describe the day that you retire. What job are you retiring from? Who's going to be coming to your party? Is there going to be a party? What plans do you have to go on to and retire? Like, just get the character thinking way ahead.
What is the happy ending? What is the sunset? If it's that sort of a book, if your character sails off into the sunset, are they retiring to travel? Are they, with the 17 grandchildren? Are they sacrificing themselves for their country? I mean, what is the happy ever after for them, or the ever after?
And then you know exactly what it is you have to subvert.
Yes, and then
as their creator.
Make it not happen.
Do you want to read B. Tomasa?
Yes, B. Tomasa pointed out that it can be useful to think about your protagonist's physicality as well, not just appearance. And that's something that I'll mention that we often get people asking, why don't we ask what the character looks like?
I think that's so obvious that it's one of those things that you can come up with yourself. You don't need us to prompt you.
No, we're trying to get below that.
Yeah.
What does the character feel like? But this is interesting.
So this is a great question.
The way they move through space. So what they look like, how they move, how they act, how these might give insight into their personality traits. And I think that's the important part here. For example, a nervous person might dress very differently than a relaxed person.
That's
an
right.
introvert, an extrovert.
Body language, like all of those sorts of things that are giving us insight into character. I think that those are really valuable.
Yeah. Whether your character wears hats or not may not give any insight to their character. But if their character wears hats exclusively all the time because they're bald and they don't want anyone to know, that tells you something.
That tells you something about them. And again, this is a good point, just to a good place to reiterate. Just retrofit this exercise in a way that you find it'll be most useful to you. Don't be afraid to add or subtract questions. It's meant to be a living, kind of breathing, organic document that reflects your character. So every question may not apply, and if you think of more, that's great. And if you come up with questions that you think were really telling and useful, and you want to share them with your fellow learners, by all means, feel free to post, because other people may benefit from them too.
Yeah. Moving on to the Hangout questions. So now we have specific questions from you, our audience. I will read the first one.
Okay.
Leslie L. Smith asks, I'm just starting a new novel series that's been percolating in the back of my mind for a few years now.
Yay.
However, I found the character questionnaire exercise for my main character to be super challenging. Do you have any tips for how to fill it out? I appear to have had a failure of imagination.
Yep, and you know what? We get this question. It's a daunting thing when you have an initial sort of idea for, let's say, you can think of a world and you know, okay, my character is going to be a plucky young heroine who's going to, go forth and have adventures. And we're asking you things like, what do you feel most ashamed of in your life? It can be really daunting to think in that level of detail. So there's a couple of things that I would say. If you're looking at this big mass of questions and going, read through and see what are the ones that speak to you? What are the ones where you say, oh yeah, I know the answer to that? Because that's giving you a little bit of insight into the character that you're beginning to build. I would also say, I jokingly referred to method acting at the beginning. Mm-hmm. I don't think it hurts if you're, again, feeling intimidated by this, to try speaking it aloud a little bit. You don't have to write everything down right off the bat. Look at those questions and think, I do this in the shower. I will confess that outright. When I'm working
Shower's a great place.
When I'm working on dialogue for characters, I might sit there kind of mumbling things to myself in the shower where nobody can hear me. But, you might try saying it out loud and imagining, okay, I am my character for a minute. And somebody has just asked me, what are you most afraid of? Live in that moment, embody that, and sort of see, okay, what comes out of my mouth? And you might surprise yourself. But it also feels lower stakes, I think, for us as writers, just to speak it than to immediately feel that you're sort of engraving it in your computer. Or that's what I do. I engrave in my computer.
She's with old a chisel. School.
Yeah. So many screens I've gone through over the years. I'm mixing my metaphors here, but I would say in terms of how to fill it out, find the ones that speak to you, try doing it out loud, and don't let it swamp you. Don't let it intimidate you. Use what's useful to you.
I will also add to that filling out this form now is not the only time you may want to fill out this form for your character.
That's right.
As someone who is working on a difficult rewrite right now, in which I realize I did not know my character as well as I should, I can go through this, and I'm planning on going through this again. I used this the first time, and I came up with what I thought my character. And now my character has gone through all the things I put them through. I'm thinking, this person's not quite who I thought they were, and I'm going to have to think deeper and more specifically about some of the things in their life. Mm-hmm. So it may take some more writing and some more time to understand your character better, especially if you're just starting out. Mm-hmm. Right? You said you've had the novel series in the back of your mind for a few years. I wonder if what you've had in your mind have been events more than character.
Or a world.
Maybe. There's a lot of work to be done creating a world, especially if it's a series. I'm assuming it could be something like fantasy. It might not be. But if it was, there's a lot of work to do in thinking of plot and thinking of species and all that sort of stuff.
It's quite possible that character isn't the first place that you go when you're trying to, especially people who start with the what if, what if there was a meteor crashed into Earth and it had major climate implications, there's no characters there yet, right? So I can see being in that position, and it's a great reminder that you can come back and touch base with that character questionnaire many times as you go along.
Madding C
says, the concepts of yearning and antagonism are portrayed as if they're constant through the life of the protagonist. However, isn't it possible that it changes as a result of some major event, paraplegia, marriage, divorce, or should the book track only one yearning and set of antagonisms, as if there was another one in the past life?
If there was another one,
and if there was another one in the past life, this is just backfill or character background information. So we've touched on this a little bit as well. It is quite possible, particularly where you're covering a large span of time. Harry Potter is a great example to see that we're tracking more than one character yearning, or that a character can embody simultaneously contrasting yearnings. I want to be, head boy, the outstanding wizard of my generation. I also just want to fit in. I just want to be like everybody else. That's
I'd rather I wasn't
okay.
so special sometimes, right? Yeah.
And what does fitting in mean when you're 11 versus when you're 18 versus when you're 40 versus when you're 75? That may be an overriding yearning, but it's going to take on definite shifts and subtle shades of difference as you progress. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And we would encourage you to think very much in those terms. Yeah, you don't want it to be a static, single yearning. I want to, I'm an 11-year-old boy. I want to marry my next door neighbor. And 40 years later, it's like, I just wanted to marry Mary. Where did Mary go?
Mary squared.
I named her Mary. Yeah, sorry, Mary. You know what I mean, though? Like those things are going to change, and that's
not
good.
Such an interesting book if it doesn't change.
Yeah.
At the same time, I would say do be careful that you don't have your character yearnings changing so much and antagonisms changing so much in a book that it's sort of going off in all directions at the same time.
That's right.
There could be a possibility that I mean, you are going to focus in a book on some concrete sort of main thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, a book implies unifying elements. There's a reason why this goes in the book.
You're saying
and that
much
doesn't
better than
go
I
in
was.
the book.
A main
I'm
thing.
thinking of David Copperfield. I'm thinking of the Buildings Roman, which is where you're telling the life story of a character, beginning with childhood and ending with the end of their life. And what's that great opening from David Copperfield?
It was the best of times.
No, that's Tale of Two Cities. It's something about it remains to be seen whether I will become the hero of my own life, or whether I will be a bystander to, and that becomes kind of an overriding leitmotif through the book, right? This idea that, is he at the center of things? Is he at the periphery of things?
Here we go. Whether I shall turn out to be the hero of my own life, or whether that station will be held by anybody else, these pages must show. Yeah,
and so even for a novel which is capturing a character's, a large chunk of a character's life, where presumably they have many yearnings and deviations and highways and byways that they go along, we're given that sense right in the first sentence that there's going to be this unifying thing that's going to pull them forward. We should probably
not just one thing after another.
Yeah.
Okay, 2 questions about writing real people. Sarah Burwood asks, it may be too early to ask this. No, it's not. You can ask anything anytime.
Yep.
But I'm wondering how to approach naming my characters, many of whom are based on real people, some of whom are known, but who are all dead. Very convenient when they're all dead. Maybe I should just make the decision after it's all done if it gets that far. Any thoughts or experience of this? Thanks. And then Joni asks as a follow-up, what ethical and legal considerations are there to consider when writing about real people? All right, you've written about some real people.
Yes. You have to get a little bit into the specifics here. So, I've written about real people who've been dead for 2,500 years.
They're not they or their relatives are
the
not
family did not come after me over things that I wrote about those characters.
Some people were grumpy about things you wrote about those characters.
Yes, we're not going to go there. No, I wrote some novels set in ancient Greece where I was writing about Alexander the Great, and some Greek people took issue with my portrayal of this iconic character. But I mean, we're not talking about legal and ethical. We're talking about artistic interpretation. Yeah. Coming back to the question, though, I mean, I think it depends on a few factors. It depends what country you're in and what the libel laws are.
It does.
It depends on, is this person considered part of the public sphere? Are they a celebrity? Are they a big historical figure? Or is it your great aunt? Is it somebody who's personal to you and your family? You have to think about the legal considerations, which will vary from territory to territory. And that's really important. We can't give you one blanket sort of, if it's more than 75 years ago, you're okay. There's not one blanket thing that's going to apply to all countries. So it's going to depend very much on where you are in the world. And then beyond those larger kind of legal considerations, you have to bring it in close and think about the ethical considerations of potentially exposing people who are near and dear to you, writing about people in your own family, or writing about people who are disguised members of your own family, where your family might recognize themselves even if nobody else does and feel really exposed by that. Are you willing to put your family through that? Are you willing to put yourself through that? And those are questions that only you can answer for yourself. I have a couple of family members who I would never write about because they're kind of fragile, and it's just, I feel like their stories aren't my stories to tell, and I don't particularly want to give them any pain. And so, that's what I've made off limits for me. You know what I mean? But everybody has to draw that line for themselves somewhere.
And even if you're writing about a famous person who's more or less fair game, if you want to put Donald Trump in your novel, or if you want to put Maggie Thatcher in your novel, you're going to have to think about what sort of a person you're going to make them, because you're putting them in a piece of fiction.
Yeah.
So you can do what you want in a way, but you have responsibilities.
But with many responsibilities that are going to go along with that. And, if you think of something like Colony of Unrequited Dreams by Wayne Johnson, who's a Canadian author, Newfoundland author, and he wrote about a very real Newfoundland political figure, Joey Smallwood, who was the first premier of the province when it joined Canada. And then he invented a completely fictional mistress for this guy who just was not a character. This guy did not have a mistress. And the family was outraged because this was still living memory. There were grandchildren and who remembered who this was. And they're like, you're defaming our granddad. Like, this is not who he was. So it's, I think the most important thing is to sort of be aware of all the ways in which little minds can go off as you're doing this, and then make decisions on each one. But these are complex issues. They're oftentimes legal issues, and I wouldn't want to try and offer a single blanket solution for you.
Yeah. And then Sarah says, maybe I should make the decision after it's all done if it gets that far. I mean, one thing we do say to people is that no one's going to publish your novel. Take it from your drawer and publish it.
Yes.
If you want to write something, write it, and then you can think about it afterwards.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. But yeah, if you're going to be putting something out in the world, then you will be doing some thinking.
And you can always decide, for your own draft for yourself, just to get the thing out, use the real person's name, knowing that you are consciously choosing never to show that to anyone. And then you may decide to fictionalize. Okay, I'm going to change the sex of this character. I'm going to change the color of their hair. I'm going to change their name. I'm going to try and fictionalize. And I think it's really important to remember that as you do that, people, as a fiction writer, people around you are always going to think that they're finding themselves in your fiction, even if that's never what you intended. So you might write a very clear portrait of someone and they will just not recognize themselves at all. You might write something which you think is complete fiction, doesn't draw in your life at all, and your mom will be phoning you angrily saying, hey. So to a certain extent, you have no control over that. People are going to find what they want to find. You
can control what you're trying to do. You can't control how people respond to what you tried to do.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Okay, Peg James.
Peg James says, the book I want to write has a sprawling ensemble cast.
Yay.
These folks come from different cultures in different parts of the world and find themselves together in a new colony on the west coast of what is now Canada. I'm interested in how the baggage they bring with them and the opportunities that open to them in this new society affect the way they interact with one another and become themselves. Is this way too ambitious for a first novel?
I love the sound of this novel. Mm-hmm. I don't think there is such a thing as too ambitious.
No, I don't think so.
Honestly, I mean, don't let anybody tell you, yeah, you're not ready to do that, or you shouldn't write that, or, really, it's your first novel. Wouldn't you start with something small?
Simple.
Small is hard. Mm-hmm. Alice Munro is proof of that. A great short story is an incredibly complicated thing. So a great big novel, there's, the one's as easy or as difficult to approach as the other.
No novel is easy to write.
No novel is easy to write. And is it ambitious? Yes. Is that a good thing? Yeah, sure. I think it can be. I mean, why shoot for a 7 out of 7, when you can shoot for a, 8 out of 10 or 9 out of 10? I'd say always go for the more ambitious thing. Really test yourself and also do what you feel passionate about.
Yeah, because if this is the novel you'd like to write, and part of you saying, maybe I should write a small, safe novel, That's not safe at all.
To learn how to write a
To learn how to
novel.
write a novel.
I mean, there's that hackneyed saying, right? You by writing a novel, you've learned how to write that novel.
But not any
It doesn't
novel.
mean you've learned to write the big ambitious one. I mean, there's nothing that can prepare you for that. And everything prepares you for that. Everything about who you are and your desire to write that. So
and
what are you waiting for?
Yeah,
I kind of feel like too. Like if that's on your bucket list, I really want to write this big epic multi-generational thing.
You should start.
Do it.
And if it fails, then you failed trying to do something interesting rather than fail trying to do something safe.
Well, and what's fail?
And what is fail? Yeah, I mean, I've written novels that I've never sent out. Do
So
I think they're a failure? No, because I learned something. I learned a lot.
Absolutely.
And looking back, even now, looking back on stuff I've written multiple years ago that I never sent or I never went anywhere, I can still think I've learned stuff that I can still use from that.
Yep.
I've learned, oh yeah, you know, I tried to be too ambitious here in the wrong way or something. And I tried to do this when I should have tried to do that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. No, Pig James, go for it.
Go for it.
If that's where the heat is for you, I think you should go for it. Allison R. My novel has several characters who are from a different cultural background than me. Do you have any suggestions for how to develop these characters in a way that avoids stereotyping and cliche? I would start by saying the fact that you're even asking this question is fantastic because it shows that you are sensitive to the issues that can arise when you're writing outside of your own place or voice or gender or sexuality or whatever it ends up being.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I have so many things to say about this. I'm not sure where to start. Do you want to?
Well, I can start with my standard simple response is you could take a course that I took because I was asking myself the same question and found very useful, and it's called Writing the Other. There's a series of courses. And there are writers there, and they have courses not just in writing outside your race or your culture, but also in writing about different types of diversity. So they have a course, I believe they had a course led by someone who's on the autism spectrum. They've had a course by talking about writing about handicapped characters.
And is this edX?
No, it's private. It's a group of, it's several writers. There's a fantasy author, Nissy Shaw. She's one of them.
Can you link to it in the?
I can link to it. It's just, if you just search Writing the Other, you should find it. I believe it's writingtheother.com even. I'll look as we're talking. But one of the things that they say is that they encourage people to have diversity, but also their courses and the stuff they talk about, they're very clear about where you need to be careful. And you need to be careful and do your research, but they don't think that the world is served by everyone only writing about themselves or people exactly like themselves.
So maybe while you're searching that, I will jump back in here and say, you know, I think that there is always going to be a spectrum that we have to place ourselves along as fiction writers. And at the one far end, we are the, you know, Knausgaards or the Ben Lerners who are basically writing, or the Jonathan Safran Foers who are, you know, writing about characters named Jonathan Safran Foer who are doing things that he would do in the normal course of his day, where it's pretty much nonfiction, a kind of heightened artificial nonfiction, and that's being called fiction. And then at the very far other end of the spectrum, you have, you know, people who feel that anything goes. You know, we have free speech in this country. I can take on any character I want. There's no rules. I can embody anything. And then I think most of us will find ourselves not at one extreme or another, but somewhere in the middle. Because of course there are going to be, you know, I would say for me as a fiction writer, I've made my peace with the idea that I'm not just writing about me, and I am going to be stepping into other genders and maybe other, you know, races or other people from other cultural backgrounds. And that's what I do as a fiction writer. You know, I'm fairly at peace with that. At the same time, are there places I would not go? Yes, absolutely. I'll give you an example. I would never try to take on the voice of an Indigenous Canadian person. And that's for a number of reasons. First and foremost, I think because we haven't had enough exposure yet to Indigenous folk telling their own stories. Yes, there's a ton out there and it's great, but if you look at it in terms of a dominant and then a, you know, much smaller or marginalized culture within a larger culture, you know, we haven't heard those voices to the same extent. We haven't heard the full diversity of stories that those voices can tell. And who am I to go in and tell a story that could be told better by someone of that culture when it hasn't been told before? So I feel that pretty strongly. Now, would I write as a man? I would. I have. Why do I feel entitled to do that? There, the relationship between a dominant and a less dominant culture is a little bit different. I'm not taking, how would I phrase this exactly? And you probably would feel the same about writing from the point of view as a woman, right?
I have written from
there's
the point of
something
view
less
of a woman,
contentious there.
but I've also had women read the stuff that I've written from the point of view of a woman.
Oh yeah, and I've done that too. I've had men read mine, and that brings us actually to the very interesting question of sensitivity readers. But just, why is that less contentious? I think it's because it's, men's voices have not been traditionally oppressed in publishing.
They have not.
You want to read a book by a man, I can go find one in Costco. If I want to read a book by an Indigenous man, I'm going to have to work a little harder to find that. So, I do think that there is a distinction to be drawn there. The point about, what I'll say whitewashing in my case, because I identify as white, I guess. No, I don't just want to populate my books with other white characters because I feel like that's all I'm entitled to, because I don't want to create a white world. That's not the world I live in Vancouver. So I am very conscious about bringing in a very multicultural world in my sort of contemporary, my stuff that I write that's set in contemporary Vancouver, because I want to reflect the world around me. But, I think Nancy's sort of, the way she frames it is, there's what you're comfortable writing from the third person, and there's what you're comfortable writing from the first person.
Yeah.
And that first person is the more contentious one, where you're claiming to speak for or embody someone. And that's where you really have to dig in and think, okay, am I even entitled to do this? And if I think I can pull this off, what do I have to do to pull this off? And that speaks to homework, which is research, which is making sure you've got your facts right, which is making sure that you are avoiding those cliches. And then sensitivity readers, and maybe you want to jump in and say a little bit about that. We talk about that in
We've talked about
course 3
that
as well.
In our other courses.
Yeah.
Just the idea of, if you are writing a story that has strong content from people from a group that is outside of your own, is finding someone from that group to give you advice and taking that advice seriously.
Yes.
And compensating them for their time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the Writing the Other people, actually the website that I've put on, writingtheother.com, they do discuss sensitivity readers, and it's something worth paying attention to. And I will say also, a simple way to get around the stereotyping cliche is reading works from writers from that cultural group. And then you will find out a bit more about what it means to be a person in that cultural group. And then you will start to get past any cliches and stereotypes you might have picked up from surface depictions written or on TV or written by people who don't have as much familiarity with that group, because that's where they come from often.
A good question to ask yourself too is, what makes me think that I'm better placed to tell this story than someone who's actually from that group?
But
that's a good framing.
It is a good framing. And I like the fact because my novel has several characters who are from different cultural groups.
Yeah.
It's not like my novel is from the point of view of.
Yeah.
Okay.
Belinda.
Last question. Belinda 42D5. What if you like all the other characters around the protagonist, but you don't like the protagonist?
Whoa.
Should you abandon the protagonist and make him or her the antagonist instead, and then find another protagonist? Are protagonists always a reflection of the writer? So writing about someone you don't like makes it doubly hard. That's an interesting series of questions.
It is an interesting series of questions. The protagonist is not always a reflection of the writer. It may be a sort of kaleidoscopic, distortion of the writer in some respects. But I mean, I've written a novel about Aristotle. He's not a reflection of me. I should be so lucky,
pretty
right?
smart.
I should be so lucky. I mean, I'm not a man. I'm not ancient Greek. I'm not a genius. I'm not, you know what I mean? Sorry, that's my phone. I think it's a mistake to think the protagonist necessarily is going to be more true or has to be a reflection of the writer. So set that one aside. What if you like all of the other characters around your protagonist, but you don't like your protagonist? That's intriguing to me. Again, think back to the very beginning of this Hangout where we were saying an antagonist isn't an enemy or evil. A protagonist, my goodness, my phone is going off the hook there. A protagonist isn't necessarily someone who is heroic or an upstanding citizen or good through and through. They're the person the story's about. So they can be, an unlikable character. They can be a character with many flaws. They can be that anti-hero.
The question is
Bret
that...
Easton Ellis. I mean,
oh, yeah. So, the question becomes, is this the person you want to write about?
Yeah. That's really the fundamental question.
Yeah.
You know,
If
are
you
there
don't, if you find yourself not being that interested in what they do, and someone else is more interesting to you, that's a different.
Yeah,
thing.
but I mean, are they intriguing to you? Are they compelling to you? You don't have to like them, right? Richard III, I don't know if he's likable.
And the
but
characters who you don't like can get their hooks into you. I mean, once you start following someone and you learn enough about them as a person, you know, I mean, we've talked about unlikable characters or characters who do bad things. There's a great, I mean, if you like that sort of thing, the show, Bill Hader's show.
Oh yeah.
On HBO, it's called, oh my God, I forgot what it's called again. We just watched it.
It's a one word.
Barry.
Barry.
It's about a hitman who goes to kill someone and then decides he wants to be an actor instead. And he does some very morally questionable things.
But it's Bill Hader.
And he's funny. And it's a funny show, but it's very dark. And they play the line. I mean, he does a few things in there that if you haven't watched the show, I won't give any spoilers, but there are things he does in the show that have made, I've read people discussing the show online, and some people have abandoned the show because they like, I can't believe he did X. He has lost my sympathy. And other people are like, even though he did X, I still want to see where he goes. This character is so fascinating.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, would you like him? I don't know. He's
well, and Lolita again that we mentioned at the outset with Humbert. I mean, there is a character who is loathsome in every respect, and yet we follow him through the story because there is something compelling there, and arguably it's just the language in which the story is told, which is the compelling thing. But you know, I think the question isn't, do I like this character? The question is, am I intrigued enough to want to spend the amount of time that I'm going to have to spend with this character?
Yeah. Do I want to see what happens next?
Do I want to see what happens next? Yes.
That's no questions on the
from the Hangout.
No questions on the chat, though we have people there saying nice things.
Oh.
If there are questions that came in a bit late for this Hangout, we will tackle them like on the website. We will tackle them next week. Just a reminder, if you want to ask questions that will be answered on the Hangout, try to get them in early. Is week 2 available now? It should have just become available.
Yes.
2 p.m. I believe at the end of the Hangout is when week 2 becomes available. So once you're done, you should see the second
refresh your screen and it should be there. We should mention as well that information is going to start coming at you thick and fast with this course. Some people have likened it to drinking from a fire hose, and we're not expecting that you're going to necessarily complete all of every last assignment in these 6 weeks. But the great thing is that this course is archived. You'll have access to it for as long as the edX platform exists, to the best of our knowledge. This is what we've been told. So you're able to come back and keep revisiting the modules as often as you want to. After the course is closed, the only thing that you won't have access to anymore is a live discussion board. These Hangouts are going to be archived, so you can go back and watch these, and I think listen to them.
Yep. Well, I'll just watch them, but
watch them.
Yeah.
If there are any questions that have arisen through the course of you watching this, or as you're working through the week 2 material, if you think, oh, you know what, I didn't really understand that thing from week 1, you can ask questions out of order of weeks. That's totally fine, and we will always endeavor to cover as many questions as we can in this Hangout. If you're looking to get us to talk about something that's particular to your novel, more context is usually helpful. So don't be afraid to write us a paragraph or two, sort of laying out the thing that you're wrestling with, rather than leaving it.
But don't paste pages of your novel in.
No, we can't. We can't do that for everybody. But I mean, a couple of substantial paragraphs is totally fine, as opposed to, I don't know if I should do my novel in 3rd person or 1st person. What do you think? If you could give us a little bit more context, that would be helpful. That's one of those things where sometimes we'll say, hey, we can't answer this one now, but if you can tell us X, Y, Z, then we'll revisit. And if we do answer any of your questions this week and you are still confused, or you feel that we didn't quite answer what you were asking, don't be afraid to put the question again and let us know that. What else do we need to cover?
That's it. Don't forget to ask questions in advance.
Same time, same place?
Same time, same place.
Next week?
Plan next week. So we will see you here.
Yes, and have fun beginning to work on your outlines. I think we're going into internal and external journey next week.
Week 2 is the internal and external journeys. Yes. You are correct.
Yes.
Varieties of form and synopsis as well.
Excellent. Yes, we do love the internal and external journey. So we wish you a safe external journey and a productive internal journey. And this time next week, you will know what that means.
All right. Now
Bye,
I'm going to
everybody.
reach awkwardly to the screen to turn this off.
Yes.
Goodbye.
Have a great writing week. Bye, everyone.